The morning sun filtered through the trees as we pulled into the driveway of our new home for the first time as owners. After 5 years of saving every spare dollar and countless weekends spent looking at properties, Sarah and I had finally found our perfect place in Oak Ridge Estates. The two-story colonial with its pristine white trim and dark blue shutters represented everything we had worked toward. I parked our car and looked over at Sarah, whose tired eyes brightened as she took in the sight. "We did it," she whispered, squeezing my hand. The weight of her police badge caught the sunlight from where it hung around her neck. She had just accepted the promotion of a lifetime, becoming the youngest police chief in our city's history. This neighborhood was specifically chosen for its proximity to the station headquarters, a convenient 15-minute drive that would make her demanding new schedule more manageable. Our moving truck arrived shortly after us, the driver carefully maneuvering down the tree-lined street before parking along the curb. Neighbors emerged from their homes as we began unloading boxes. Most came bearing welcome gifts, homemade cookies, potted plants, and local restaurant recommendations. The community seemed warm and inviting, exactly what we had hoped for. All except for one. I noticed her immediately, a thin woman with perfectly styled silver hair standing on her front porch directly across the street. Unlike the others, she made no move to introduce herself. Instead, she watched with narrowed eyes, occasionally writing something on a clipboard. Whenever I glanced in her direction, her gaze would harden before she turned away. By evening, our living room was filled with labeled boxes and misplaced furniture. Sarah hung her dress uniform in the closet, the new chief insignia still in its protective packaging. She was scheduled to be sworn in officially the following week. As we collapsed onto our couch, exhausted but happy, a sharp knock interrupted our moment of peace. No one was at the door when I answered, but a bright orange paper had been taped to it. "Violation notice," it read in bold letters. Apparently, our moving truck had been parked on the street for longer than the allowed 4-hour window. I did not recall reading about that restriction in any of our closing documents. The next morning, a thick manila envelope was stuffed into our mailbox, the official HOA welcome packet. Inside was a rulebook nearly 100 pages long, filled with regulations covering everything from acceptable mailbox designs to approved shades of exterior paint. The opening letter contained thinly veiled threats about the consequences of noncompliance, including fines that would automatically convert to property liens after 90 days. Sarah flipped through the pages, her law enforcement experience making her particularly sensitive to the aggressive language. "This seems excessive," she commented, but her mind was clearly elsewhere, focused on her upcoming responsibilities. 2 days later, while watering our new front garden, I finally met her, Brenda Matthews, HOA president. She approached with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes, clipboard clutched against her chest like armor. "Welcome to Oak Ridge," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I trust you have received our community guidelines. We pride ourselves on maintaining standards here. The previous owners of your home had some difficulty adapting to our expectations. I do hope you will find the adjustment easier." The warning in her words was unmistakable. As she walked away, I noticed her taking photos of our property from different angles. The battle, it seemed, had already begun, though neither of us yet understood just how personal it would become. The first month in our new home passed in a blur of unpacking and adjustment. Sarah dove headfirst into her role as chief, working 12 to 14-hour days, establishing her authority in a department that had been run by men twice her age for decades. She often returned home well after dark, exhausted but determined. To avoid blocking my car in the garage, she took to parking her unmarked police cruiser on the street in front of our house. It began innocuously enough. A yellow notice appeared on our windshield one morning, citing an unspecified parking violation. The next day, another. By the end of the week, our recycling bin contained a rainbow of warning slips, each printed on increasingly vibrant paper as if the color intensity might somehow underscore the severity of our apparent transgressions. I dove into the HOA guidelines, reading every page carefully. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, prohibiting residents from parking on the public street in front of their own homes. When I called the number printed on the notices, I reached Brenda directly. Her voice remained pleasant, but her message was clear. "The board takes these matters very seriously," she informed me. "While the specific language about street parking might not be explicit in your copy of the guidelines, we have an understanding in this community. Nobody wants to look out their windows and see cars lining the street like some kind of apartment complex. It lowers property values." I attempted to explain Sarah's situation, her long hours, her new position, but Brenda interrupted me. "Rules apply equally to everyone, regardless of occupation. Perhaps you should consider building an additional garage." The notices continued, now graduating to our front door rather than just the windshield. Each one listed a specific fine amount, with the totals growing larger. When I mentioned the situation to Sarah, she was too overwhelmed with her new responsibilities to engage fully with what seemed like petty neighborhood politics. "Just ignore her for now," Sarah suggested one night, removing her service weapon and badge after a particularly grueling day. "Once I get things under control at work, I will look into whether these fines are even legal." The monthly HOA meeting arrived, and I decided to address the issue formally. The community center was packed with residents, most of whom I had not yet met. Brenda presided at the front, gavel in hand, the other board members flanking her like loyal lieutenants. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand and was recognized. I had barely begun explaining our situation when Brenda interrupted. "Perhaps in your previous neighborhood, rules were merely suggestions," she projected loudly, causing several attendees to chuckle nervously. "Here in Oak Ridge Estates, we take our community standards seriously. The board has already addressed your concerns privately. Next issue, please." My face burned as I returned to my seat. No one would meet my eyes. The remainder of the meeting proceeded as if I had never spoken, with Brenda controlling every aspect of the discussion with practiced efficiency. As I walked to my car afterward, an older gentleman approached me cautiously. He introduced himself as Tom, a resident of 15 years. "Do not take it personally," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Brenda does this to someone new every year or so. The people who owned your house before you left because of her. They were targeted from day one, just like you are being targeted now." Over the next few weeks, I noticed Brenda documenting our property daily. She photographed everything: our mailbox, garden beds, the exact placement of our trash bins. New violation notices appeared with increasing frequency, citing infractions that seemed entirely subjective or fabricated. The side gate was improperly latched. Our garden hose was improperly stored. The shade of white on our mailbox was apparently a different tone than what was approved. Meanwhile, Sarah continued parking on the street, her cruiser a beacon that seemed to attract Brenda's growing hostility. Inside our home, the fine notices piled up like fallen autumn leaves, their total now reaching an amount that made my stomach churn. We had saved for years to afford this house. The thought of losing it over manufactured HOA violations was both infuriating and terrifying. What we did not yet realize was that Brenda Matthews was just getting started, and that her next move would force even my overworked wife to finally take notice. The sound jolted me from my concentration, metal scraping against pavement, the distinctive hydraulic whine of machinery in operation. I rushed from my home office to the front window and felt my heart drop. A tow truck was positioned beside Sarah's unmarked police cruiser, its operator already securing chains to the undercarriage. I burst through our front door, not bothering with shoes or a jacket despite the autumn chill. From across the street, Brenda Matthews watched the scene unfold from beneath her porch umbrella, clipboard in hand, and a satisfied expression on her face. The morning sun reflected off her spectacles as she made a show of documenting the proceedings. "Stop!" I shouted to the tow operator, a heavy-set man who barely glanced in my direction. "That vehicle belongs to the police chief. You cannot tow it." The operator shrugged without pausing his work. "Orders are orders, buddy. This car has been reported as an abandoned vehicle creating a public hazard. I got the paperwork right here." Abandoned. The cruiser had been parked there for less than 12 hours, since Sarah returned from her shift the previous night. Public hazard. It was parked legally along an uncrowded curb. I ran back inside and grabbed Sarah's police identification from her home office. When I returned and thrust the credentials toward the tow operator, his eyes widened noticeably. "This is the vehicle of Chief Sarah Mitchell of the City Police Department," I explained, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Unless you want to explain to her and the entire department why you towed the chief's car, I suggest you reconsider." The operator looked uncertainly between the ID in my hand and Brenda's increasingly flushed face across the street. Without another word, he began removing the chains and winch attachments. Through subsequent research that afternoon, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The towing company, Matthews Recovery Services, was owned by none other than Richard Matthews, Brenda's husband. The HOA had an exclusive contract with their company, and according to public records, had paid them over $70,000 in fees during the previous fiscal year alone. This was not about rules or property values. This was a racket. When Sarah called during her lunch break, I filled her in on the morning's events. For the first time since the harassment began, she was fully engaged with the situation. "They tried to tow my vehicle, my department vehicle." The professional calm she maintained at work cracked slightly. "Let me make some calls. Do not confront them yet." That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, a sharp knock echoed through our home. Sarah had just returned from work, still in her chief's uniform, when we opened the door together. Brenda Matthews stood on our porch, phone held at eye level and clearly recording. Behind her, two other HOA board members lingered awkwardly at the bottom of our steps. "Good evening," Brenda began, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "The board has authorized me to pursue all available remedies for your continued violations. Your accumulated fines now total $8,750. If payment is not received within 72 hours, we will begin the process of placing a lien on your property." Sarah stepped forward, her posture shifting subtly into what I recognized as her professional stance, back straight, shoulders squared, expression neutral but commanding. "Ms. Matthews, I believe there has been some misunderstanding regarding both the validity of these supposed violations and your authority to enforce them. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately." Brenda's camera remained focused on us. "There is nothing to discuss. The rules are clearly stated in the guidelines you received upon moving in." Her practiced smile tightened. "No one is above community standards, regardless of their position in local government." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. This was not just about our parking anymore. This was Brenda directly challenging Sarah's authority, both in our neighborhood and beyond. Though Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. The pattern of harassment that had seemed like petty neighborhood politics had evolved into something darker and more personal. After Brenda and her entourage departed, our dining table quickly disappeared beneath the evidence of her campaign against us. Printed emails, violation notices with inconsistent citations, photographs of our home taken from strange angles, and legal documents threatening financial penalties that could potentially cost us our dream home. Sarah removed her badge and placed it on the table amidst the papers. For a moment, she was silent, her law enforcement mind clearly processing everything from a new perspective. "This ends now," she said finally, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "Tomorrow, we start investigating, not as residents being harassed, but as victims of what I suspect is a much larger pattern of abuse and possibly criminal behavior." As we sorted through the documentation of Brenda's 3-month campaign against us, one thing became abundantly clear. The HOA president had no idea who she had chosen to target this time, and she certainly had no idea what was coming next. Our dining room transformed overnight from a place of meals and conversation to an investigation headquarters that would have impressed my colleagues at the precinct. Sarah approached the situation with the methodical precision that had earned her the chief position at such a young age. Whiteboards appeared on our walls, filled with timelines, names, and connections. Financial statements and property records spread across every surface. "The first rule of any investigation," Sarah explained as she organized documents into categories, "is to determine whether what you are observing is an isolated incident or part of a pattern." While Sarah leveraged her professional resources to dig into public records, I became her civilian counterpart, navigating the social dynamics of our neighborhood. I started with Tom, the longtime resident who had warned me after the HOA meeting. Over coffee in his kitchen, safely away from prying eyes, he revealed that Brenda had been selectively targeting residents for nearly a decade. "It always follows the same pattern," Tom explained, his voice lowered despite us being alone. "She focuses on newer residents, especially those who might question her authority or who have some visible difference she can exploit. The family before you was from South Korea. She claimed their cooking odors violated some obscure nuisance clause in the HOA agreement." Armed with names from Tom, I quietly contacted former residents. Many were initially reluctant to speak, the memory of their harassment still fresh despite having moved away years ago. Once they understood our situation, however, the stories poured out, all depressingly similar to our own experience. Several forwarded me emails and violation notices they had saved, creating a documented history of Brenda's tactics spanning years. Meanwhile, Sarah focused on following the money. As police chief, she had access to public records that might take an ordinary citizen weeks to obtain. What she discovered made our personal harassment seem almost insignificant by comparison. "Look at this," she said late one night, spreading financial statements across our kitchen island. "Over the past 5 years, the HOA has paid Matthew's Recovery Services, the towing company owned by Brenda's husband, nearly $400,000. That is more than triple the amount they should have paid based on industry standard rates." Further investigation revealed thousands of dollars flowing from HOA accounts into what appeared to be Brenda's personal expenses. Premium landscaping for her own property classified as common area maintenance. A family vacation to Bermuda listed as a board retreat. And regular payments to a cleaning service that serviced only the Matthews residents. The most damning discovery came from the county records office. I found the original HOA covenants filed when Oak Ridge Estates was first developed 20 years earlier. These documents contained no restrictions whatsoever on street parking. In fact, they explicitly stated that public streets within the development were not subject to HOA governance. When I showed Sarah, she immediately compared these official documents to the current guidelines Brenda had provided us. The differences were striking. Dozens of additional restrictions had been added, many handwritten and initialed by Brenda herself, with no evidence of proper board approval or resident voting as required by state law. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Sarah uncovered something that made her sit back in her chair, a rare smile crossing her exhausted face. 15 years earlier, Brenda Matthews had been convicted of financial fraud in another state, a conviction she had concealed during her election to the HOA board. According to the association's own bylaws, this conviction legally disqualified her from serving as an officer. "We have got her," Sarah said quietly, organizing the evidence into labeled folders. "This is not just HOA overreach or selective enforcement. This is fraud, embezzlement, and possibly criminal conspiracy. The question now is how to handle it." We debated our options late into the night. We could file a police report immediately, but that risked creating the appearance that Sarah was abusing her position for personal benefit. We could sue Brenda and the HOA directly, but litigation would be expensive and drag on for months or years. "There is a third option," Sarah suggested as morning light began filtering through our windows. "We expose everything publicly, all at once, with irrefutable evidence. We need to show the entire community what has been happening, not just to us but to everyone." The strategy took shape between us, a careful, deliberate plan that would require perfect execution. Like detectives assembling a case against an organized crime operation, we organized our evidence methodically, creating backups of every document and recording. We were no longer just defending ourselves. We were working to free an entire neighborhood from years of intimidation and financial exploitation. As we finished compiling our evidence, Sarah placed her hand over mine. "We only get one chance at this," she said. "If we fail, she will find a way to retaliate and we could lose everything." I nodded, understanding the stakes completely. The home we had saved years for, the community we hoped to build a life in, even potentially Sarah's professional reputation, all hung in the balance. But one thing had become crystal clear during our investigation. We were far from the first victims of Brenda's schemes, but we were determined to be the last. The morning after completing our investigation, we met with Elena Rodriguez, an attorney specializing in HOA disputes. Her office walls were lined with framed newspaper articles detailing various victories against overzealous homeowners associations. She reviewed our evidence in silence, occasionally making notes or pausing to examine a document more closely. "This is not just HOA overreach," she finally said, tapping her experienced finger against the financial records spread across her desk. "This is fraud, plain and simple. Brenda Matthews has been operating the association as her personal fiefdom, and her husband's towing company provides the perfect mechanism to both intimidate residents and siphon funds." Elena outlined potential legal approaches: civil litigation, criminal complaints, regulatory interventions. Each had advantages but also significant drawbacks in terms of time, expense, and public exposure. What we needed was immediate relief and community-wide recognition of the problem. "The HOA bylaws themselves provide your best immediate recourse," Elena advised. "Section 8.4 allows for emergency board meetings when requested by 3 or more board members, and Section 12.2 permits removal of officers found to be in violation of the ethics provisions, which her undisclosed fraud conviction clearly is. Armed with legal advice, I arranged a clandestine meeting with 3 current board members at a coffee shop 20 miles from our neighborhood. All 3 had served for years under Brenda's leadership, but admitted they had little actual power or insight into the financial operations. "She controls everything," explained Michael, a retired accountant who had questioned financial reports in the past only to be aggressively shut down. "We see summary statements, not detailed expenditures. When anyone asks questions, they suddenly find themselves the target of violation notices or social ostracism." Their nervous glances toward the door revealed the culture of fear Brenda had created. Even meeting with me felt dangerous to them. Yet when I shared our evidence, particularly the embezzlement documentation and Brenda's disqualifying criminal history, their fear gradually transformed into determination. "I will call for an emergency meeting," Michael committed, the other 2 nodding in agreement. "We need to do this by the book, following every procedural requirement so she cannot claim impropriety." Meanwhile, Sarah prepared an official investigation notice on police department letterhead, detailing financial discrepancies between Matthew's recovery services and HOA accounts. Rather than leading the investigation herself, which could create a conflict of interest, she assigned it to the department's Financial Crimes Division. "The department representative will attend the HOA meeting to announce the investigation officially," she explained as we refined our strategy. "That way, I can address the HOA as a resident rather than as chief. We need to separate my professional authority from our personal stake in this situation." At home, our kitchen island disappeared beneath legal documents and strategy maps. I practiced my presentation repeatedly, refining how to present complex financial evidence in ways the average homeowner could immediately grasp. We created slides showing doctored documents side by side with originals, unauthorized bank transfers highlighted in red, and a timeline of Brenda's selective enforcement against specific households. Sarah stood before her closet one evening, deliberately selecting civilian clothes for the upcoming meeting. "My authority needs to come from the evidence and the law, not my uniform," she explained. "This is about being residents fighting injustice, not about leveraging my position." The night before the meeting, we meticulously organized our evidence into labeled folders, creating multiple copies to distribute to board members and key community leaders. Each document was numbered and cross-referenced, creating an undeniable paper trail of Brenda's years of manipulation and financial impropriety. "We only get one chance at this," Sarah reminded me as we reviewed our plan one final time. "If we miss anything or if she finds any procedural error to exploit, she could spin this as a personal vendetta." I nodded, understanding completely. This was not just about parking violations or petty neighborhood power struggles anymore. This was about exposing years of systematic abuse and financial exploitation that had affected dozens of families and potentially involved hundreds of thousands of misappropriated dollars. As we prepared for bed, the certified letter Michael had sent to Brenda officially calling for the emergency meeting sat on our entryway table, the opening move in what would either be our community's liberation or our own undoing. Either way, there would be no going back. The community center had never been so full. Word of the emergency meeting had spread throughout the neighborhood, bringing residents who had never before participated in HOA matters. Extra folding chairs were arranged in tight rows as neighbors whispered anxiously among themselves. I recognized faces I had only glimpsed through windows or across lawns during our months in Oak Ridge Estates. Sarah and I arrived early, placing our evidence folders on seats we had reserved in the front row. Detective Wilson from the Financial Crimes Division nodded to Sarah from across the room, maintaining professional distance as planned. The room continued filling until people were standing along the walls, the air heavy with anticipation. Precisely at 7 o'clock, Brenda Matthews strode to the podium with practiced authority, her silver hair perfectly styled, a gavel clutched in her manicured hand. If she was concerned about the unusual attendance or the surprise meeting called without her knowledge, nothing in her demeanor revealed it. "I call this meeting to order," she announced, her voice carrying with the confidence of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. "While the circumstances of this gathering are irregular, I appreciate the opportunity to address community concerns. We will follow standard procedure, with discussion limited to pre-approved agenda items." Michael, seated at the board table beside her, cleared his throat. "Madam President, as the meeting was called under Bylaw 8.4, the agenda has already been established by the requesting members. The first item is an examination of HOA financial practices and rule enforcement procedures." A flicker of annoyance crossed Brenda's face before her practiced smile returned. "Very well. Does someone wish to present these concerns?" This was my cue. I rose from my seat, evidence folder in hand, and approached the podium. Brenda reluctantly stepped aside, though not far enough to fully cede the space. As the projector illuminated the screen behind us with the first of my prepared slides, I began methodically presenting our findings. For the past 3 months, my family has experienced targeted harassment through selective enforcement of rules that do not actually exist in our official HOA documents. I began, my voice steadier than I had anticipated. What we discovered through investigation is that this is not an isolated incident, but rather part of a systematic pattern affecting many households over many years. I presented evidence chronologically. First, the original HOA documents without street parking restrictions, then Brenda's modified version with unauthorized amendments. Financial records appeared on screen showing the excessive payments to Matthews Recovery Services compared to standard industry rates. Brenda repeatedly attempted to interrupt, her voice growing increasingly strident. "Point of order," became her mantra, though she struggled to specify which rules were being violated. "These allegations are baseless and potentially defamatory. I move to adjourn this meeting immediately for legal consultation." Michael shook his head. "The bylaws do not permit adjournment during presentation of evidence of potential misconduct. The presentation will continue." As I revealed the documentation of embezzled funds, HOA money used for Brenda's personal expenses, the room temperature seemed to rise. Neighbors leaned forward in their seats, expressions of shock giving way to anger. The most damning evidence came last. Official court records of Brenda's fraud conviction 15 years earlier, explicitly disqualifying her from board service under our HOA's own bylaws. "This is outrageous," Brenda interrupted, her composure finally cracking. "These documents are clearly falsified. This is nothing but a personal vendetta because you refuse to follow community standards that everyone else abides by without complaint." Her words hung in the air for a moment before Thomas, our elderly neighbor, stood shakily from his seat in the third row. "That is not true," he said, his voice quavering but determined. "My late wife and I received similar harassment when we installed a wheelchair ramp after her stroke. Brenda claimed it violated architectural guidelines, even though ADA laws clearly protected our right to accessible housing." His testimony broke the dam. One by one, current and former residents rose to share their stories. The young Hispanic family threatened with fines for birthday decorations that remained up for 2 days. The widow who nearly lost her home over disputed late fees that mysteriously doubled each month. The black family who received violations for excessive gatherings when hosting their church group. Brenda's face flushed deeper with each testimony. Her desperate glances toward the exit found her path blocked by residents now standing in solidarity. "This is a conspiracy," she sputtered. "I have only ever acted in the best interest of property values and community standards." Detective Wilson chose this moment to approach the podium. "As a representative of the City Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, I am hereby providing official notice that an investigation has been opened into financial discrepancies between Oak Ridge Estates HOA and Matthews Recovery Services. We ask that all financial records be preserved pending our investigation." The decisive moment arrived when Sarah finally stood, her civilian clothes belying the natural authority in her posture. The room fell silent as she approached the podium, her voice commanding the space without raising its volume. "As both a resident of this community and the chief of police for this city, I cannot allow this pattern of harassment and financial impropriety to continue," she stated clearly. "While I have recused myself from the official investigation to avoid any conflict of interest, I stand before you tonight as your neighbor, asking the board to take immediate action in accordance with the bylaws that govern us all." Brenda's face drained of color as she finally made the connection, her eyes darting between Sarah and the financial crimes detective. "You are the new police chief, the one who has been parking illegally." "I have been parking legally on a public street," Sarah corrected calmly, "as confirmed by the original HOA documents and city ordinances." Michael stood at the board table. "According to Section 12.2 of our bylaws, I move for an immediate vote on the removal of Brenda Matthews from her position as HOA president and board member, based on the evidence presented regarding her disqualifying criminal history and financial improprieties." The vote happened in real time, hands rising around the room like a wave of reclamation as community members recognized their collective power. Brenda's gavel sat abandoned on the podium, her authority dissolved by truth and transparency. As the overwhelming result became clear, she gathered her papers with trembling hands and walked out of the community center without a word. Her decade-long reign of neighborhood terror finally ended. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge Estates with new growth, both literal and metaphorical. The community notice board, once dominated by violation warnings, now displayed announcements for neighborhood watch meetings and the upcoming block party. The winter of Brenda's rigid control had finally given way to a season of renewal and genuine community. Michael had been elected interim HOA president, with a diverse board that actually represented our neighborhood's demographics. Their first official act was to nullify all outstanding violation notices and fines issued during Brenda's tenure, pending review of their validity. Their second was to terminate the exclusive contract with Matthews Recovery Services. The financial investigation proceeded methodically through proper channels, with Sarah maintaining professional distance from the case. The preliminary findings shocked even those of us who had uncovered the initial evidence. Over 7 years, the Matthews had diverted nearly $500,000 from HOA funds through inflated service contracts, fraudulent reimbursements, and outright theft. One sunny Saturday morning, the interim board met around our dining table, the same surface that had held our investigation materials months earlier. Now it supported coffee mugs and pastries as neighbors who had once been strangers reviewed simplified guidelines that prioritized community well-being over punitive enforcement. The new rules fit on 10 pages instead of 100, Michael announced proudly, distributing copies printed on plain white paper rather than the threatening neon colors Brenda had favored. And we have added a resident dispute resolution process that prevents any single board member from issuing violations unilaterally. Legal documents detailing the settlement with Brenda and her husband circulated among board members. Rather than face criminal prosecution, they had agreed to full restitution of misappropriated funds, plus a substantial penalty that would fund repairs to the neighborhood playground and community center. The settlement included a provision barring both from serving on any HOA board or community organization with fiduciary responsibilities. Sarah now parked her cruiser proudly on the street when necessary, neighbors occasionally stopping to chat when they saw her arriving home. Many apologized for their silence during the early days of our harassment. "We were all so afraid of becoming her next target," explained Lisa, a young mother who lived 2 doors down. "Watching you stand up to her gave us courage we should have found years ago." The FOR sale sign appeared in front of the Matthews house barely a week after the emergency meeting. Neighbors did not harass them during their moving process or document their infractions as they packed. Instead, the community observed in peaceful silence as the moving truck loaded their possessions, and the sold rider was eventually added to the sign. Our neighborhood exhaled collectively, like survivors of a natural disaster taking stock of what remained and finding it stronger than before. New residents who purchased the Matthews home were greeted with genuine welcome baskets and accurate copies of the simplified community guidelines. The first block party in over a decade was scheduled for the first weekend of May. Tables lined the street that had once been forbidden territory, each household contributing food and drinks to the communal celebration. Children played in the front yards and on the sidewalks, their laughter replacing the tense silence that had previously characterized our community. Sarah stood among our neighbors not as the police chief, but simply as a neighbor with a plate of homemade cookies, her authority now rooted in respect rather than fear. Several residents sought her advice on establishing a neighborhood watch program, which she was happy to help organize properly. "You know," Thomas said, approaching us with a glass of lemonade in his trembling hand, "this is what I always hoped this neighborhood could be. My Margaret would have loved to see everyone together like this." As twilight settled over the gathering, I looked around at the home and community we had fought so hard to preserve. Neighbors who had once been afraid to make eye contact now engaged in animated conversations. The street where Sarah's parking had caused so much conflict now hosted tables of shared food and fellowship. In fighting for our right to remain in our dream home, we had inadvertently liberated an entire community from years of intimidation. The neighborhood we had sought when purchasing our house had been here all along, waiting to be uncovered beneath layers of fear and control. As if reading my thoughts, Sarah slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "This was worth fighting for." And looking at the transformed community around us, connected through shared experience and newfound courage, I could not have agreed more.